You've probably heard of the observer effect. The fact that our eyes don't necessarily see what is actually in front of us, and that light, when it is observed, does something very different. In every aspect of our lives, the most we could possibly ask for is truth. And somebody who is pursuing truth is my friend, Ashton Forbes. Now, he may have been ridiculed. He may still be the object of some people's jokes. But he is trying everything possible to solve what is clearly more than just your average mystery. MH370 did not crash. It did not have a suicidal pilot. It did have hundreds of souls on board. And it did have something to do with the US government. We deserve answers. We deserve truth. And it's about time that somebody managed to get disclosure in every aspect of your life. Ask nothing.
Works and why it is that we haven't heard about these things only in things like, the quote unquote conspiracy theory UFO community for so long. So with that said, I'm going to play a little bit of music here, and then we're going to get started.
Okay, chat. What's going on with my sound here? Hopefully that's good. What the hell? Okay, chat. Hey, everybody, for being on here tonight. Thank you, everybody who's already jumped on. Appreciate you guys being out here with us. We're playing a little bit of music, and then we're going to get started here with this stream. So tonight, we are looking at Salvatore Pais Patents. We're going to look at them here with Jake Chansley. I've got them pulled up. We're going to go one by one through them, do a little bit of explanation of the significance of them, and then we'll do a little bit of kind of what it means in general for us. I'll let Jake give his reactions on the stuff, and then we'll probably pull people up, talk about the significance, and let people give their own opinions and weigh in on them, what they think about them, etc. I think these patents are really important, so it should be fun. Let's just go ahead and say hi to everybody we got in the chat. Sandy, William, Busy Lizzie, Lamp, Starduster, Sil Joe, Antonia, nice to see you as well in the chat. Cognizant Ape, good to see you. PJ Mike, Mick, James. We haven't seen Pig James in a while. I think that's most of the people. No, I just finished work and going straight from work into this space here tonight, guys. So it's gonna be a busy one. I'm definitely gonna have to take a nap after this, and then I'm gonna also push out the next Hard Truths podcast, which was been recorded actually for about a week and a half. That's gonna be tomorrow. I'm gonna push that out with Martin Gibson. So that'll be fun. That's to review unification theories, a little bit of a change of pace, and I'll work on editing the interview that I did last week with Jack Sarfati as well. So hang in there just a couple minutes, guys, and then we will get started. Let's see how the relative volumes look here. I dropped this one more. How's that? Let's see. Okay, that might be a little too low. I think we're going to need to put it right about there. Thank you very much. Also, guys, if you did not check out the Vetted podcast, check that one out. If you guys did not check out the Professor Simon Holland, check that out on YouTube as well. And I think here we go.
That song is called Talkin' Hawkin' by Pink Floyd on their Endless River album. If you haven't listened to that album, it is absolutely incredible, and I would recommend it to anyone and everyone who digs Pink Floyd. It's the last album they produced shortly after Richard Wright died. Anyway, okay. Ashton, good to see you.
Jake, man, how's it going? How are you doing today?
Doing very well, my friend. Doing very well. So glad that you're here and decided to do this space.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome, man. So I would do a little bit of background for people, if that's okay, while we have people filtering in. So what we're doing here today, I think if you guys jumped on early, Jake was saying that we're going to be talking over the Salvatore Pais patents. If you guys are familiar with Jake Chansley, which I think a lot of you are, he has been doing a lot of interviews, similar to I've been doing interviews, but he very specifically was on with Tucker Carlson, and he brought up these patents with Tucker Carlson. I thought Tucker's reaction was interesting, that a lot of people don't know that these patents are out there. And that's why I really wanted to chat with Jake about it and get the information out there to a broader audience, because these patents are real. They have been approved. They're not just sitting out there or in some other weird status. And the implications of these patents are huge in terms of what it means for our society. And so what I'm hoping that we can get out of this as we review these patents and look over them together is more awareness for them and get the word out about their existence, because these patents can potentially change the course of our entire civilization. So just a quick brief review in terms of who Salvatore Pais is. He is a U.S. Navy engineer. I've interviewed him twice on my Hard Truths podcast. If you want to check those out, you're free to check those out. My YouTube channel is the same as my Twitter channel. It's at JustXAshton. You can check that out on the podcast. Highly recommend looking over that. The story of these patents, a little bit of this is trust me, bro, but I was told these patents only got approved through some kind of loophole that potentially happened. They were approved under the Trump administration between 2016 and 2020, and that these patents had to get special. That basically the Navy had to step in because the patent office, the officer, did not think that especially the energy densities could be possible that these patents would produce. And so the Navy had to come in, step in and say, no, these are possible. They have seen them. And that's what allowed these 3 patents to get approved. So I think it's really exciting because it goes to show that the government went to some lengths to convince regular people that would not have thought this type of technology is possible, that no, it actually is. And it speaks to this idea that the government has secret advanced technology that we haven't been aware of. These may be some of the first patents ever that have been not classified, out there in the public, that clearly show technology that we would consider to be either magic or some people may consider to be alien technology. I'll leave that for you guys to figure out where the origin of this stuff is. And so I was hoping to go over these. I want to get Jake's thoughts and opinions on them, because I know he's got this huge, rich background in terms of not just UFOlogy, but in terms of just science and the kind of what quantum mechanics means for our everyday lives. So I think we're going to have a really fun space here tonight.
As do I. I'm actually going to post up in the nest here the brief clip from the Tucker Carlson interview that you the 1 minute thing that you posted on your account, Ash, where I talk about these patents. I've also got a video up there where actually you and I first met, which was in that Kim.com space, where I talked about all the technology that is being suppressed and what we know about it, etc. But before we get into the patents and what they are, if you're okay with it, I'd just like to briefly go over the context of how it is that things like this being kept secret is even possible. Are you cool with that really quick, Ash?
Yeah, do it.
All right. So let's talk for a second about this notion of the deep state. So the founding fathers defined tyranny as the three branches of government legislative, law writing, executive, law enforcing, and judicial law adjudicating being consolidated into a centralized power where a centralized control system has a monopoly on all three of these aspects of government. So the founding fathers divided our government into three branches with checks and balances. So the deep state is, in fact, comprised of three things: the checks and balances portions of our government being circumvented through corruption, and therefore power being centralized through that circumvention. So if you corrupt the checks and balances portions of the system, you need not corrupt the whole system, just the checks and balances portions that keep the system from being co-opted and power being centralized. So that is one aspect to the deep state, the checks and balances portions being corrupted. The second aspect to the deep state is the bureaucracy, which is over 500 federal regulatory agencies that have the ability to, quote unquote, regulate commerce. So they are writing the regulations for our economy that tell us what we can buy, what we can sell, what is legal, what is illegal. And in that sense, these regulatory agencies, which are comprised of unelected officials, rather appointed officials that stay in power for far longer than those that appointed them, these individuals and these agencies end up writing these regulations, which is in a form, in a way of creating law. So that's legislative. These bureaucratic agencies also have the ability to enforce these regulations on the American people. So that's an executive element to each of these bureaucratic agencies. And they also have their own administrative courts that are outside of the federal court system. And therefore, they are adjudicating these regulations. So that's judicial. That's tyranny. Now, their third aspect to the deep state is the international corporations and the international banking cartels that are lobbying our government or are paying people off or blackmailing people in the checks and balances portions and within the bureaucracy. And if you want a good example of the kind of bureaucrats that are at the heads of these agencies and how they're colluding with international entities, just look at Anthony Fauci and look at the medical system that we have, right? The regulations are being written by these international corporations and banking cartels so that they can monopolize our resources, our labor, and our currency, and they can move our public tax dollars into their private hands through subsidies, bailouts, and government contracts. So that is essentially what the deep state is. Now, if you think about it, these NGOs, these big energy companies and stuff like that, if they want to monopolize our energy grid, then they have to use the regulations within these bureaucratic agencies in order to enforce those monopolies, which means that anything and everything that is going to compromise that monopoly is therefore subject to the executive elements of these bureaucratic agencies coming in and saying, you can't do that. That is a disruptive patent. That is a disruptive technology. What that basically means is that it would disrupt these international entities and their monopolies. And that being said, these entities, these international entities who are writing these regulations and then using the government's monopoly on the initiation of force to reinforce their monopolies on our resources, labor, and currency, they essentially own the entire grid, right? And they're all using taxpayer-funded money. They're all using taxpayer dollars for the most part to ensure that these monopolies stay intact. Now, let's talk for a second about where these technologies, whether they, especially if they're like government funded or taxpayer funded, where it is they're being done. They're being done in the deep underground military bases. There's literally hundreds of them all around the country. A couple of examples would be NORAD, would be Area 51, or even in one, I guess it's a private deep underground base, would be the Denver International Airport. These things are built to basically be underground cities. And they are built through the use of things like tunnel boring machines or nuclear tunnel boring machines. They cost billions of dollars to make. And each of these different military bases, these deep underground military bases, is in one way or another kind of like a stovepipe of compartmentalized research based on different elements of the economy and its infrastructure. And that basically means means that each of these different bases is operating based on different research and development projects that we essentially are funding. And most of the time, if not all the time, the individuals doing the research and development in these bases are actually corporations, the very corporations that are using the government's, monopoly on the initiation of force to take our tax dollars, and then through that taking of those tax dollars, they get the government contracts to do this research and development in the dumps. And all of these corporations and their employees are compartmentalized. They're compartmentalized through things like non-disclosure agreements, security clearances. And if you want an example of how all of this stuff can go on without the public being any the wiser, just look into things like the Manhattan Project and how easy it was for them to keep the truth about the atomic bomb and the building of a city out in the middle of nowhere in the New Mexico desert a secret from the public. There's also other elements to the compartmentalization. That's things like special access programs, the black budget, black projects, things that are like what are called umbrella projects, which basically means that the Congress knows about a very specific project that they say they will fund. They will use our taxpayer dollars to fund, but then there's all these other smaller projects underneath that umbrella project that most people in Congress, if any at all, don't know about. They don't know anything about these projects below this umbrella project that actually are the things that are these special access projects getting funded. So in a way, we actually have a breakaway civilization that is underneath our feet, quite literally. They have their own laws, like non-disclosure agreements, security clearances, and the laws that apply there. They have their own money, and we're talking like billions of dollars here. Then the money and the resources all kind of bind together. They have their own resources, they have their own water, they have their own food, they have their own transportation system between these deep underground military bases. They have underground tunnels that have like trains, magnetic trains that go Mach 2 so that they could go from DC to LA in 30 minutes. They have their own technology, they have their own weapons, and many people even say they have their own religion. And there are currently within these deep underground military bases and within this deep state top secret or above top secret apparatus, there are literally 5,000 to 6,000 patents that are classified, disruptive patents that we, the American people, paid for the research and development, but they have been kept from us because they would disrupt these three-letter agencies and their colluding corporations, monopolies on our grid system. So this is where the TR3B, the zero-point energy engine, and the room temperature superconductor come into play, because the implications, the functionality, and the applications to these technologies will basically disrupt and render void and obsolete this entire grid system that's being used to enslave the planet and maintain this power grid, this power structure, not just in the United States, but across the world. So there's the context. This is how this stuff can remain secret. Now let's get into, Ash, and I leave you the mic, let's get into this technology, how it was released, what Salvatore Pais had to do, what the loopholes were, how the technology works, the implications for our economy, and the applications for our socioeconomic system.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I think that was a pretty good summary in general. I want to add a little bit on to what you just said, is that a lot of this is happening in private labs that are out there. I know this because I've talked to the scientists and engineers firsthand, so I've gotten a little bit of insight. 100% accurate in terms of the special access programs, SAPs. If you're not familiar with that term, get used to it, get in your vocab. This is above top secret. This is the highest levels of secrecy possible. This type of technology goes even beyond nuclear weapons. That's how disruptive the technologies are. And just like Jake said, this is the reason why it's being kept secret. It comes down to power and maintaining power over the populace. If we had stuff like free energy, for example, then it would be much more difficult to kind of enslave us to the lives that we are stuck in here. With respect to keeping it secret as well, it's very easy to keep this stuff secret. That's something that everybody needs to realize. A lot of people think, well, if this was out there, people would be saying it. First of all, they are They've been talking to me openly on my Hard Truths podcast. People ignore it. People don't think it can be real. People get discredited. And if people really do have NDAs, which a lot of them do, and they can't say certain stuff, if you listen to Salvatore Pais on the 2 appearances he did with me, he has to keep some of the information back because he doesn't want to help out our adversaries. And if he were to break any NDAs that he has, then he might go to prison over it. His whole life will be ruined. His whole family's lives will be ruined. And this is a very powerful motivator in order to keep this information secret out there. But despite that, we were still able to get these patents. My opinion, from having talked to Salvatore Pais many times and twice on my podcasts, and I will always tell you my true opinions anytime you want, is that he has seen this technology in action, technology that we would think is magic, potentially anti-gravitational technology. We're going to be talking about piezoelectric induced high-temperature superconductors. We're going to be talking about craft using an inertial mass reduction device. And we're going to be talking about high-frequency gravitational waves today. As Jake said, extremely disruptive patents. So the one I wanted to start with here today is the piezoelectric induced high-temperature superconductor. Now, this is the one where I think it's going to take the most kind of abstract understanding. The other two, I think, are going to come to people right away in terms of what the implications are. But not a lot of people understand what superconductivity is or what high-temperature superconductivity is. So real quick, what I will say is that a superconductor is a semiconductor that is perfectly conductive. This means that the electrons can flow without any resistance whatsoever. And why is that important is that usually when we have a semiconductor, the reason why they heat up is because the electrons, as they're moving, run into the atoms. And when that happens, it causes friction, things heat up. This is why your computer heats up, why your phone heats up, etc. So now imagine that what happens in these superconductors is that we can achieve this superconductive state, which is like a quantum state. They call it Cooper pairing. And these Cooper pairs then begin to float freely without any resistance whatsoever. And there may be more than one way to achieve this. One way is by metamaterials, by producing an element, mixing things together at the atomic layer, where you can produce a state where now these electrons are flowing freely. And the way that this patent is going to propose that you can do it is through a vibrational effect, potentially getting into a resonance with the particular insulator and metal coating that you put around it so that it creates this superconductive effect through vibration. So the patent abstract here, and you guys can look these patents up yourselves. I'll try to get them in the Nest, but my app I'm using right now for this is not...
I placed the patents in the Nest.
Thank you very much, good sir. Appreciate that. So the present invention is a high-temperature superconductor consisting of a wire, which comprises of an insulator core and a metal coating. The metal coating is deposed around the insulator core, and the metal is coating deposited on the core. When a pulsed current is passed through the wire, while the wire is vibrated, high temperature superconductivity is induced. And some of the, I'm not going to read through all of this here just for the sake of time, but I want to read through some of the kind of powerful terminology that comes across here, is that the achievement of high temperature superconductivity represents a highly disruptive technology capable of a total paradigm change in science and technology rather than just a paradigm shift. Hence, the military and commercial value is considerable. So simply put, a high-temperature superconductor can be enabled in a current carrying special composite metal wire, which is abruptly vibrated by mechanical, magnetic, electrical, and or electromagnetic means. The wire is a bulk insulator with a thin coating of a normal metal, such as aluminum or other practicable coating. The coating has a thickness on the order of the London penetration depth, which is how far the magnetic field can penetrate into the object. And an externally applied magnetic field is applied to the metal. For the electrically driven vibration, the wire is coated with lead zinc titanate, PZT, ceramic poor metal, or any other material which the piezoelectric effect can be induced. Since the high-temperature superconductive current may be generated along the metal insulator interface boundary, this wire configuration can be termed an unconventional superconductor. Now, the other thing I want to say here is that it says that a high-temperature superconductor is a material is capable of exhibiting superconductivity at high temperatures above 25 degrees Celsius. That is very hot. Now, this is important because superconductors, as we know them right now, require very cold temperatures. So somewhere on the order of minus 200 degrees or even colder than that. Now, this is important because the issue of superconductors right now is we know they can do magical type quantum effects. but it takes a lot of energy to cool something down to that degree. So if we can achieve a high temperature superconductor, now we can have those magical effects without inputting a bunch of energy into it. That's the secret that we're trying to achieve here with respect to this. We know superconductivity exists. We want to do it without having to expend a bunch of energy in order to achieve it.
So, Ash,
Go
really
ahead.
quick, I have a question for you,
Yep.
because I just want to condense what it is that you said
Please do.
in layman's terms so that I understand it. What you're basically saying is that through metal alloys and through magnetics and understanding the electron spin resonance, shall we say, of certain metals, if you layer these things properly, then the electrons can flow through this hybrid metal electromagnetic layer cake of sorts, so that there is no rubbing of the electrons against the atom.
Exactly. And then therefore we have no resistance. So if people want to think of what this could do, is imagine your computer can be, you can overclock your computer, for our computer nerds out there that speed up their processors. Overclock your computer 1,000 times because it's no longer going to heat up. Imagine that your phone doesn't ever heat up anymore either. Imagine that we could produce a wire that can transmit electricity over long distances from the west coast to the east coast of the United States with no loss of power due to heat. When you look at power lines, just the heat alone causes at least 30% of the energy to be lost just in transmission. So you can imagine if we have perfect transmission of energy without loss of heat, now we could collect solar power on the West Coast and transmit it to the Midwest or the East Coast, or we can take wind power from the Midwest and transmit it somewhere else. That alone is a paradigm shift where we don't even need free energy or any of these other exotic energy sources in order to just completely change our world. And when we look at superconductivity, one of the big things that we see is something called flux pinning and the Meissner effect. Now, what this essentially means is that you can take take the superconductor, and you can place it over a magnet. And when you place it over the magnet, it will get stuck, suspended in midair. But not just stuck, that if you have like a magnetic, let's say, racetrack, you could shoot it and it would just follow the racetrack and skim around it. And that seems cool because you can imagine a hoverboard, but it gets even crazier. If you were to take that same magnet that's underneath your superconductor, you can actually rotate the magnet around the superconductor, and the superconductor will stay stuck in place. You can move the magnet above the superconductor, and the superconductor will just stay perfectly in place. And the reason for this is that some of the magnetic fields are passing directly through the superconductor, and others are passing around it, which gets it stuck. And when you think about this in your mind, at least for me, the first thing that comes to mind is this idea of UFOs and how they can hover out there. So this is the secret sauce for how we can begin to understand where we might be able to achieve some type of anti-gravitational effect. The last thing I'll say is that I spoke to Dr. Jack Sarfati last week, and I asked him specifically about what the role of superconductivity is in anti-gravity. And while I don't understand all the equations, I'm not a PhD, the main thing was that superconductivity essentially is like an exponential growth. So that when you put it into your equation, it gets to a point now where the equation means that I'm going to probably say this somewhat wrong. I'm going to have to go back and double check my interview with him. But that the magnetic field goes so strong that in terms of the math equations, now it makes it very easy to achieve the power levels required in order to make the object essentially not negate the force of gravity, but create a counter force that can cause it to levitate, cause it to float. And you can imagine that because that's exactly what we see when we see the flux pinning effect and the Meissner effect that's out there. Go ahead, Jake. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, only that I think that in layman's terms, what you're basically saying is that this wire alone, this superconductivity, room temperature or high temperature superconductivity, enables the transmission of energy in a way to where there's no loss of energy. Therefore, that makes the entirety of our grid system obsolete.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it would change everything. If you imagine that we would change our electrical wires to using some type of superconductive wire, then yeah, it's going to change everything. When we look at the Large Hadron Collider, the particle accelerators, they actually use superconductive magnets in order to make those particles accelerate to near speeds of light and then crash into one another. The other place where we see superconductivity used is in quantum computers. And this is part of the reason why they have to keep them at basically absolute zero temperatures to ensure that the entanglement effects that they use do not get disrupted by decoherence, as well as for the superconductors to work as well. So superconductivity, we're talking about stuff like hoverboards, mag trains, zero loss of energy due to distance and transmission. We're talking about our quantum computers that we use, and really everything that you would think of as kind of just really advanced technology out there is based around superconductivity. So to me,
that also means that our entire grid system is based on losing energy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, right now we lose a huge amount of energy at the moment, which is a big issue with respect to our energy crisis and problems that we have out there. I mean, if you imagine that we lose 30% of energy due to heat right now, and all of that were to go away, we were just to get 30% more energy just overnight. Just imagine the giant implications. If you're somebody that believes in green energy, this is your savior right here. If you're somebody that just wants to transition from one type to another type of energy, it just opens the door up for that. And if you're somebody who just wants the benefits, you just want that hoverboard or what have you, you can get that. If you're somebody who wants your super fast computer, you can get that as well. Or, if your phone doesn't heat up as much anymore either, you can imagine this might increase your battery life as well. So there's even implications for your phone potentially being able to last 20%, 30%, maybe even longer due to making batteries that use like superconductive materials. Now, they're also
really quick, but hold on. It would make sense now why it is that this patent would be disruptive and why it would be classified if the international corporations that are monopolizing our resources and our grid system and our energy are actually the ones writing the regulations for the government, because then that means that they no longer have a monopoly on this obsolete grid system if just this one patent alone gets out to the public.
Yeah, I personally believe that superconductivity, room temperature, high temperature superconductivity, sometimes you'll hear it used either way, is being suppressed. I think it's probably been suppressed for decades. I've looked back at some of the scientific papers, and this goes back to Prigogine, as well as even probably people before him. And we're talking going back to like the 50s and 60s. So this goes way back. If you guys followed LK99 both last summer, as well as I think just a month or two ago, there was a American Physical Society meeting. I think it was in Minneapolis, and there was a new variant of LK99, which was called something else. They have different names that they tested, and they had proven with various videos that these room temperature rocks are just floating freely over a magnet. And that, yes, like I said, we were seeing flux pinning and the Meissner effect that's out there, which makes you wonder, both from last summer. I think what happened last summer is that, and this is where we have to be very careful. I find that there's a lot of science influencers out there that are very suspicious to me, because when you listen to what we've been talking about here, you go, who would not be interested in this? Who does not want this to be a reality? Everybody should want this. And yet what immediately happened is people started to try to recreate it. But this is kind of like, if I give you the recipe for a really good lasagna, is everybody's lasagna going to come out the same? No, everybody's lasagna is going to come out a little bit different. And so some people started to recreate it, and one person comes out and says, no, they're not able to recreate it, and they go, oh, this must be debunked, this is fake. But that doesn't mean, that's not how logic and reason works. That just means we don't know how to make the recipe like the first people that made it did. And so then what happened in February here is that they came out with some different variants of the recipe. And they proved that these very different variants were also producing high temperature superconductivity and showing all the same effects, zero resistance, showing the Meissner effect and flux pinning out there. And then it just disappeared once again. This should be like front page news on every single newspaper, like what Jake was talking about, how disruptive this type of technology is. It's going to literally change every single thing about our planet. And to me, that's why when I look at this patent, when you guys combine these patents together, you're going to find, well, these get called UFO patents, because when you combine these together, you realize this is how you can make a craft float. But to me, any one of these patents just alone would absolutely change everything about our entire civilization. The superconductivity, the one I think it itself is probably the biggest out of all of them, just because of all the implications we just discussed.
Well, and let us not forget, there's 5,000 to 6,000 classified disruptive patents out there. So if these 3 patents alone, which, as you said earlier, and I do think it's true, we've had for decades. If these 3 patents have these kinds of implications, imagine how much they've expanded upon the knowledge that they had to create these patents, to create more innovations and more efficient technologies.
Yeah, and so I even forgot the biggest one. Guys, I forgot the biggest one is that when you have these extremely powerful magnetic field effects, this is also what it would take. They use superconductors in one more thing, fusion power devices. So you guys have probably heard about some of these fusion power devices they've got out there. They've got a giant one in Europe, and there's various ones out there. They've been in the news periodically talking about that they can turn on for like 5 or 10 seconds and produce more energy than what it takes to get them started. They all use superconductors. And imagine now that those superconductors, we don't need to cool them down. We don't need to put that energy in order to get that. This is where you can begin to get fusion power, just like we see the sun, but in the palm of our hand. Miniaturized, portable fusion power. That's what superconductors, high temperature superconductors, can lead to. So we can actually achieve what we would think of as over unity, or you can call it free energy. But really, when we talk about over unity, what we mean is coefficient of performance greater than 1. And what that means is that we are getting more power out, greater than 1, than what we put into that system there locally. And we know this is possible because we can look up at the sun, and we can see the sun doing it every single day. The thing that we really want to be able to achieve is we want to be able to miniaturize it to the point where we can have one that's the size of a building, or maybe the size of a computer, something that you could put into your home, and you could just now run energy freely within your home and not be connected to the grid at all. Now, going back to Jake's point, how disruptive would that be?
Well, and this is why I'm beginning to wonder, okay, we have 3 patents here that we're discussing that have the ability to transform socioeconomics and geopolitics for the rest of human history. And when we talk about the DUMBs and compartmentalization, is it possible that, one deep underground military base is doing research and development on room temperature superconductivity or high temperature superconductivity? Another military base across the country is doing experiments on anti-gravity or inertia propulsion. And then another one is doing research on things like zero-point energy engines and stuff like that, so that all of these ingredients don't ever get to basically come together, and the scientists working on these things don't actually get to collaborate and converse about what it is that they're working on.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. This is why I like talking to you, because you've got the other thoughts that I haven't got out there, like ready to go. We are on the same wavelength. Is that the way this works? And again, this comes from what I've been told by the people that literally work in these types of labs, is that the individual pieces of the information are out there. Rarely do we get what we're doing here today, which is where you put them all together. And so they may be producing one aspect of this, or researching condensed plasma physics, matter physics on the East Coast. They might be looking into room temperature superconductivity on the West Coast. In the Midwest, they might be looking into various anti-gravitational effects. And then there's certain places where they potentially get put together, like, let's just say, Los Alamos Laboratory, or Huntsville, Alabama, which is NASA Marshall Space Laboratory. So there may be various locations, but this is how you compartmentalize the information, so that the pieces of the information are out there. But from the scientist perspective, they don't all necessarily have it. And from the public perspective, we see these advancements incrementally from these different aspects, but nobody's really putting together to figure out what this all means if we were to combine it. And then when you combine it, this is where you start to get what we would think of as just straight up magic technology.
Okay, so now let's move on to the zero-point energy engine, because the room temperature or high temperature superconductor actually allows something like an infinite clean energy supply to be transmitted and to be sent from coast to coast or in somebody's home or whatever without the loss of energy. So now we actually have a way of sort of containing this infinite amount of energy that's coming from the quantum foam of space-time itself. We have a way of transmitting it without it being volatile. Is that correct? Is that what happens when you combine these things?
Yeah, and so I think the thing for people to understand is we don't need new physics to describe this, but we do need to understand that there's an extra dimension. I'm going to refer to it as the fifth dimension, and that's not just because it's some movie term or anything like that. We have three spatial dimensions. We have up, down, we have left, right, and we have forward and back. We also have one time dimension, which we perceive as moving forward all the time, but quantum mechanics would tell us that time is a flat circle, much like the True Detective TV show. We need to understand that there's that extra dimension out there. Why is that important? Because that means that we can tap into the negative entropy of the fifth dimension. Think of it as just a blank slate that's out there. And everything that we see, the complexity, the entropy, all around us is what's painted on top of that. And if we're able to tap into that, that means that we can achieve stuff like faster than light communication, but that also means that free space is not empty. Well, it looks like emptiness to us is not empty, and we can utilize that and create a system that can use that energy. And that's how we can get something like coefficient of performance greater than 1 without potentially violating the laws of thermodynamics, which would otherwise say that we cannot get more energy out of a system than we put into it. We open that system up and we allow it to borrow energy from the vacuum of space-time, and now we can potentially get over unity. So the next patent that we're going to talk about here, which that's kind of our foundational one. Think of superconductivity as something that we can achieve through this invention, or that we can achieve through metamaterials. And that's going to be the foundation we need in order to induce these other effects that we're going to be talking about. The next one is craft using an inertial mass reduction device patent. And this one's by Salvatore Pais, that was accepted by the Patent Office in 2017, also under Trump. And I'm just going to read off. You guys can check out my Twitter profile if you want to see it yourself. But a craft using an inertial mass reduction device comprises of an inner resonant cavity wall and an outer resonant cavity and microwave emitters. The electrically charged outer resonant cavity wall and electrically insulated inner cavity wall form a resonant cavity. The microwave emitters create a high-frequency electromagnetic waves throughout the resonant cavity, causing the resonant cavity to vibrate in an accelerated mode to create a local polarized vacuum outside the outer resonant cavity wall. Artificially generated high-energy electromagnetic fields, and that's what we can potentially create from the superconductivity, such as those generated by the high-energy electromagnetic field generator, which is another one of Salvatore Pais's inventions, interact strongly with the vacuum energy state. The vacuum energy state can be described as an aggregate or a collective state, comprised of the superposition of all quantum field fluctuations permeating the entire fabric of space-time. High energy interaction with the vacuum energy state can give rise to emergent physical phenomenon, such as force and matter fields unification. According to quantum field theory, this strong interaction between the fields is based on the mechanism of transfer of vibrational energy between the fields. The transfer of vibrational energy further induces local fluctuations in adjacent quantum fields which permeate spacetime. These fields may or may not be electromagnetic in nature. Matter, energy, and spacetime are all emergent constructs which arise out of the fundamental framework that is the vacuum energy state. Everything that surrounds us, ourselves included, can be described as macroscopic collections of fluctuations, vibrations, and oscillations in quantum field mechanics. Matter is confined energy, bound within those fields, frozen in a quantum of time. Therefore, under certain conditions, such as coupling of high-frequency axial spin with hyperfrequency vibrations of electrically charged systems, the rules and special effects of quantum field behavior also apply to macroscopic physical entities. Macroscopic quantum phenomenon. Last paragraph. If we can engineer the structure of the local quantum vacuum state, we can engineer the fabric of our reality at the most fundamental level, thus affecting a physical system's inertial and gravitational properties. This realization would greatly advance the fields of aerospace propulsion and power generation. So when we're talking about this, what are we talking about here is that the resonant cavity is essentially take like two walls, and the area between those two walls is our resonant cavity. And if we can give that a very strong charge, then we can create a situation now where we can separate the object itself from the vacuum of space-time around it. And now this is the idea where we can create, with a high enough charge, high enough electromagnetic field, this idea where our object can get, think of it like creating a bubble around the object. And now what can happen is we can get mass reduction, meaning that our object is going to get lighter because it's not going to be connected any longer to the space-time around it. And now this is how you can think of how it could be achieve the properties of quantum. So now that you could take an object the size of your cell phone, you put a bubble around it, similar if you have a bubble underneath the water and something, and now it's just going to begin to float. Because if its mass gets reduced to zero, at least from a local perspective in our space-time, now it's not going to be affected by gravity anymore. Now it's just going to be able to float freely out there. And this is where we begin to think of the idea of, back to the name of the patent, craft using inertial mass reduction for transmedium travel. So we're talking about traveling through the air, we're talking about traveling through the water, and we're talking about traveling through the space. And how can it do that? Because it's created a bubble in space-time itself where it's moving around. This can even achieve superluminal speeds. And when I say superluminal relativistic speeds, and the reason why I say that is because if you're inside the bubble, it just seems like you go from one place and now you're in the other place. But if you are looking at it from the outside, it would look like the object moved faster than the speed of light. At one moment it's over here, and the next moment it's somewhere else. And now, how does this make any sense? Because again, we have a fifth dimension that we do not perceive. Jake, what are your thoughts?
That's what I was gonna ask, because based on what you were saying earlier about like this fifth dimensional place where it's basically filled with potential and it's like a blank slate, if we are able to take the quantum probability wave that is at this basic quantum level and then basically magnify that probability wave into a probability bubble of sorts that is around an object, then we are able to essentially place that object into that dimension, and then at that dimension the potentiality of where it is that it goes is infinite. It's no longer stuck in the 3D world. It's now, because of this bubble around it, it's almost like it is merged into this other dimension that is beyond physicality and in a realm where it's like quantum and cosmic are essentially one and the same. Am I correct?
Yeah, and this all goes back to the double slit experiment. So the double slit experiment is where, when we don't observe or measure the photon as we send it through two different slits, we get an interference pattern, a wave pattern, or you can think of it as like we don't know exactly where the photon is. When we measure it, all of a sudden it becomes deterministic. The wave pattern breaks down, and now we can see exactly where it is. And this goes back to Thomas Bearden and scalar physics. This idea that the wave function collapsing causes us to go from the probabilistic location of the object to the deterministic location of the object. But now imagine we reverse that process. Imagine where we have something that's in a deterministic place and time, an object that I'm holding, like my wallet that I'm holding right now, and instead we rebuild the wave function. We say this can be either over here or over here, and we trick the universe. And now we have the capability where this object can go from a deterministic point to a probabilistic one. And that seems like a conceptual, almost like a paradox, but it's been proven experimentally that not only with the double slit experiment does the wave function break down, but you can rebuild the wave function again in the same exact experiment. And they've done this through something called the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, where they entangled the photon, they split it in half. And they sent one half down to a normal detector, and the wave function is broken down. And they send the other half down to a randomizer. And the randomizer basically rebuilds and says, once again, you make two different randomizers. So you have two slits, your left slit and your right slit. You send them both to a randomizer. And you say, okay, now it can go to any one of four different detectors. And the randomizer is going to shoot it to one random one that we don't know. What ends up happening is the wave function rebuilds itself because now the universe doesn't know where it's supposed to go. So we know that we can rebuild the wave function. The question is, how do we do that at the level of a macroscopic sized object? Something that we can actually hold in our hands, not something that's just a single photon. And this is why, in my mind, just reading this patent, nobody comes up with this patent unless they've seen it firsthand in the laboratory. It's too out there. It's too specific. And Salvatore Pais has even said that he had to leave the secret sauce out of this. But I think that just from describing it, reading through this patent, you can get the idea of what we're talking about here. We're talking about rebuilding the wave function, this idea that we can tap into that extra dimension and use it as a tunnel, like a wormhole. Now, it's not going to look like a wormhole from, Star Trek, potentially. But instead, what we're talking about, we're not talking about teleportation like Star Trek teleportation. We're not dematerializing something and rematerializing it. From the perspective of the person who's inside the craft, it's going to look like you're going through a doorway. You walk through the doorway and now you're on the other side of the planet. And your time, it seems like you just only took 1 second. But from the people on the outside, it's going to look very weird. All of a sudden, you're going to be in one spot, and then there's going to be a time dilation effect where, from the outside perspective, it may look like you showed up 5 or 10 minutes later on the other side of the planet. And this is weird because time is not a constant. Time is variable dependent on the observer. And there's something called time dilation as well. And the faster that you move, the slower your time goes. And so this means that actually, technically, we don't all age the same. It just seems like we do because we're all on the planet Earth and we're all moving at the very similar speeds to one another, experience the same amount of gravity. But the more gravity or the faster you move at the speed of light, the slower your time goes relative to other people. So what this means if we were thinking about it just practically, is that if I were, and I like to use the Interstellar example, guys. So if you haven't seen that movie, check it out. This is where I learned about time dilation. It's very real. Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway go onto a planet where they are next to a black hole, and that's a huge amount of mass. And they go from a space station that's much further away. And they are only supposed to spend a couple minutes there. They get stuck there for a couple hours. And they go back to the space station, and 20 years have gone by for the person who's on the space station. This is real. So what would that look like, though? If you are Matthew McConaughey and you're on the planet, your time is going to look like it's moving normally. When you look up at the space station, it's going to look like the space station is moving in super speed, like the Quicksilver from the X-Men movies, just going to be like shooting around super fast because the time is moving differently. If you're in the space station and you're looking back down at Matthew McConaughey on the planet, it's going to look like he's moving in slow motion. And that's time dilation. And that's a real effect that we've measured using atomic clocks that we sent up on airplanes. So that's how I want you guys to think about this type of craft. Now, Jake, what are your thoughts about the implementation of this type of craft? How long do you think we've had it out there? And do you think this could relate to something like the TR-3B?
Absolutely. And in order to produce enough energy to create time dilation or to create something like an anti-gravity bubble, you would need a massive amount of energy to do that. And what we're talking about, I think, here is the merger. When you say we're kind of flipping the observer effect around, we're talking about the merging or the opening up of a quantum realm and then using that quantum wave probability to encapsulate a object. And then it's almost like the object is actually going beyond microscopic. And it's using quantum wormholes that are already existent in space-time in order for us to make choices. We're using quantum wormholes to dilate time and move an object through space and time in this other dimension. Now, the implications of this are basically going from LA to DC in the snap of a finger. The implications of this are that we could literally go across the planet through an elevator, like what I've heard with some of these secret space program people, that they go to a building, they get in an elevator, they go down the elevator, they feel something strange for a second, and then lo and behold, they are either on another planet like Mars or in another location all the way across the planet, like going from DC all the way to Australia or something like that. So what we're talking about here is a evolution in transportation. We are talking about the reduction in the price of transporting goods and services into a nanosecond, which the whole reason why so many things are expensive, especially now, is because the price of fuel has gone up dramatically, which means that the price of all the goods or services that it's going to take to move those resources or to move those services across space and time is going to go up dramatically as well, because it costs more to get things from A to B. So this actually would impact our supply chain dramatically. And the TR3B would enable us to do things like transport food to the third world in the snap of a finger without it, biodegrading. It would also enable us to do things like go to the bottom of the ocean and survey the bottom of the ocean. It would enable us to do things like mine asteroid fields or the asteroid belt that's in between Mars and Jupiter, which means that the mining corporations are going to take a hit here on the planet. It would enable us to do so many things that would shift the paradigm in such a way that all of these people that are running the deep state would no longer have a monopoly on these industries, and therefore they would no longer be able to hold us prisoner or hold us hostage based on this illusion of scarcity.
Yeah, and so I want to add some more stuff just to really drive home the feasibility of this and practicality of this. Is that what we're talking about here is Alcubierre warp drive. It's really that simple when it comes down to it, manipulating gravitational fields in order to create a bubble around an object. How do we do that? How do we break through the fabric of space-time? The answer to that is we break something called the Schwinger limit, which is very high energy densities that are required, where now you can actually cause a breakdown in the fabric of reality to get to that underlying layer that we know is there in order for this to make any sense, but we don't see all around us. We never perceive all around us. Now, how do we do that? Well, the thing about Coulomb's law, which tells us the electric force, is that the electric force is divided by the square of the distance between the forces. So if we have two extremely powerful electric, let's say, charged objects, and we were to jam those charged objects together, the closer they get to one another, the amount of force is going to increase exponentially. So if we take some very, very powerful, let's say 3 objects, because 3 objects is the minimum number you need in order to create a triangle, a two-dimensional shape in a 3D environment, and we jam those together, as they get closer and closer to one another, the electric force is going to increase exponentially. And at some point, it's going to hit that Schwinger limit, and then pop, you are going to get your wormhole, so to speak. And then your only question is, how do you direct the travel of that? Well, we have a mechanism for that as well. It's called entanglement. So if we potentially have these entangled, you can imagine a rubber band, and you take your rubber band and you spread it really far apart, and then you take your Coulomb's law and you have your objects converge next to one another, and then poof, all of a sudden you go from one location and you reappear in another. And whatever energy that got pulled from one location, whatever object, now it's going to immediately appear in a different location. And you potentially are going to have that time dilation effect proportionate to the distance traveled. Now, the implications of this, like Jake just said, there's huge socioeconomic and implications to this in terms of, mining asteroids, transportation changing overnight. We don't need airplanes anymore if we can walk through portals, almost like the show Stargate and things like that. But it also has a mental impact on people, because for this to be real and have that extra dimension, people are now going to start to wonder, do we live in some type of construct that has been created for us, like in the movie The Matrix? And this is actually something that will potentially break people's minds out there. And to me, this is the reason, at least with this patent, why you hide this information. First of all, there's huge military applications, you guys can imagine. I mean, if we can, teleport or warp a nuke onto somebody, now we have what we would call a warp nuke. And there's no stopping it. It's just going to show up right on top of the Kremlin, or, right on top of, any adversary we want, North Korea. Or they can shoot a nuke at us and we can just turn it right back around on them. Or we can send it to the center of the earth or to the sun or anywhere we want. So this technology is huge.
Traffic, Ashton. What do you think about traffic with the TR3Bs?
Yeah, the traffic situation, I think the big concern would be I think that even if the waves, when you rebuild the wave function, even if they were to go through each other, it wouldn't matter because you're on that extra dimension that we don't perceive. They're just going to pass right through each other. So traffic might go away, but if we only have certain portal locations where you can walk through them, maybe in the beginning at least, then I imagine everybody's going to be sitting there like we'll go to the airport, but now we're going to the portal port, and then we have to walk through that portal. But the neat idea about that is that this technology seems like magic to a lot of people. And I think that I would have said this technology is 1,000 years more advanced than we are right now, but we're staring at it. We're looking at it in the patents right now. And it makes me wonder that, okay, what does it actually look like now if we had these patents tomorrow versus where we might be 1,000 years from now? It might be that tomorrow we go to the portal port and we walk through it. And then maybe 100 years from now, we have a handgun that you can create a portal in your house and then you can walk right through it. So that's the stuff where I want people to think about is that
kind of like Rick and Morty.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about Rick and Morty. I love it. You're a fan of Rick and Morty as well. But yeah, that's the beauty of it too, is that even if we get this technology, there's still so much further to push it. And stuff like quantum computers and AI can help us do that. And it can also help us find the metamaterials that we need to potentially have our first patent that we talked about, the piezoelectric high temperature superconductor. So those are our first two. Do you have any other thoughts on the craft of inertial mass reduction?
I do. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the government or the military or these corporations have had this technology for a long time, but they've been keeping it suppressed from the public. But they've been using it, not just had it, but been using it. How is it that they would use this stuff to create very specific timelines? If they are able to go outside of time and almost like look down at Earth and say, okay, we're going to take humanity and civilization in this direction, then they would actually be able to watch the propaganda and all of the stuff that's in the Mockingbird media and in schools kind of play out almost like in Interstellar, where he's in that place where he's in the like library at his house, and then you have all of the like the Tesseract type dimension where he sees all of these different time and play, all these different times in the same place layered on top of one another, and then he's kind of able to manipulate in this other dimension what's going on in the physical one. Then I think that what we are witnessing now is actually a feud between different factions of the quote-unquote deep state that have access to this technology. And there are certain factions that wish to do things like reduce the population, move us toward AI and transhumanism, and basically hijack human civilization to create a more technocratic, tyrannical system where they are the ones in charge of everything, all the resources, all the labor, all of the currency. And then we have another element of the deep state where you have individuals that are like, no, we want to release this technology to the people. And in that sense, there would actually be a bifurcation of these different versions of the world. There would be a place within this other dimension where there's two different ways that the particle that is the Earth could go, one slit or the other. And I think that what we're witnessing is the use of this technology to create scaffolding for both of these timelines. And these technologies are being used to guide humanity like a guidepost in this other dimension to move humanity and steer them toward one timeline or the other. And the real battlefield here is actually the minds of the human beings, because the kind of effects that you're talking about with these craft and almost like the reversing of the quantum probability wave and all that, we as human beings do that moment by moment through quantum computation. We as human beings are tapping into that quantum probability wave 40 times a second, and we're choosing which reality that we're going to bring into existence by moving our minds and our bodies through space-time to specific realities. And based on the frequency of our thought, similar to the frequency of the that's surrounding these craft, based on our thoughts and our frequency, we are tapping into that quantum realm where we are branching to another reality in space-time, but we're not doing it at such a high speed that we're popping in one wormhole and out another, where if we want to go up and get ourselves a glass of water, we actually have to walk across the room. But it's almost like we're walking through one little wormhole after another to get there. That is, for us, just normal reality. But when it comes to these craft, we're talking about jumping minutes or months or years ahead, if all depending on the speed. So my thinking is then that this is the reason for the propaganda apparatus, is to influence the minds of the population, so that not only does this technology remain suppressed, but also that our minds are guided by this scaffolding that is being created by these interdimensional vehicles surrounding the planet, so that they can guide us toward a civilization that is based on artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and geoengineering, bioengineering. And then there's this other faction, maybe Salvatore Pais and the Navy are a part of that. I would like to think that they are. There's this other faction that is like, no, no, no. We want this information to get out to the public. We want people to have this understanding that we have, that essentially we are living in a matrix. And it is possible to get out of this matrix that has been constructed by less than 1% of the population who've been keeping this technology suppressed.
Yeah, and I want to speak on a few of those different aspects that you brought up. A lot of really important stuff out there. So first, with respect to the sides that are out there, and I don't know who's on what side. I do have it on pretty good authority that, just like you mentioned, there are different factions within the government. Some of them that want the information out, some of them that don't. My opinion is that at least the Navy and potentially the defense intelligence agencies want the information out. The people that I correlate to those agencies would be Salvatore Pais, related to the Navy, General Flynn, related to the DIA. He was actually the director of the DIA once upon a time. Whether or not you like these people or not, it's kind of irrelevant. I think politics is a little bit of a game anyway. General Flynn has actually been following me on Twitter, which I think is pretty amazing. And then you also have the CIA, which I don't know exactly where they fall on this whole thing. I do know they haven't been silencing me yet, so I appreciate that. And then I've been told that the DOD and the Air Force are potentially on the side where they want to keep this information under wraps. Now, I think that both sides are probably justified in their own reasons. The side where I think Jake and I would probably fall on is the side of getting this information out there to the public, where the people deserve this. It will, reduce the power of the centralized government, the deep state, if you want to call it that, and give power back to the people. But look at it from the other aspect, and we're going to talk about this in the last patent, is what if this technology has weaponization purposes? Clearly, we've talked about them already with respect to warp nukes. It gets a lot darker than that. Then you could imagine that the other side would be afraid that we are going to destroy ourselves, or that when a conflict occurs, that we will destroy ourselves, or if terrorists were to get hold of this type of weaponry, instead of, just blowing up a few people, they can destroy the whole planet. This is something that would be extremely scary. Now, let's talk briefly about what Jake said about unification theories and timelines. So, and I here's where I'll tell you I don't know exactly what the answer is. I think that if you're a proponent of string theory, you believe that we create alternate timelines if we were to violate the laws or violate the speed of light. That if we go faster than the speed of light, there's going to be some causality issue. You can show up somewhere before an effect has occurred, and that begins to create the paradox, the grandfather paradox, where you potentially could have, killed your parents before you were born, that type of issue. That's one approach to it, is where we create different timelines. That's one resolution. And that if the timeline shifts, then there's infinite timelines out there, multiverse, etc. The other idea is this idea of retrocausality. And this is something that when I talked to Dr. Jack Sarfati about, he's a big proponent of. And I think that delayed choice quantum eraser experiment actually, in my opinion, proves that retrocausality is real, meaning that the future impacts the current, the present. And this is a very unusual thing to think of. The TV shows that I think of and movies that address this are the movie Tenet and the TV show Dark, which is the idea that whatever happened always happened. So we can go back in time, but if we go back in time or send messages to the past, if I were to call my younger self, I always called my younger self. And the only reason why I don't remember it is because I didn't realize I was talking to my older self when I was younger. And this is how you correct the paradox that's out there. So these are the ways where I leave it to you to determine what you think is the more logical approach to it. But what Jake said about these miniature wormholes, what he's talking about there is something called Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen, EPR, which is quantum mechanics, what we see from the double slit experiment, where the idea of how does the wave function actually break down. And this has to do with our perception of time, is that time is not linear. It just seems linear because we're in these biological bodies. But from the universe's perspective, from the fifth dimension perspective, time is flowing not linearly like we perceive it. You can go forward or backward in time. And that's how we have stuff like non-locality and quantum teleportation. So how do we unify these theories? That's what unification theories are. And the answer, the one that I like the best, is something called ER equals EPR. So Einstein-Rosen-Podolsky EPR, quantum mechanics, equals Einstein-Rosen bridge, wormholes from the general relativistic sense. The idea that we can rip through that fabric of space-time and now appear somewhere else. Those concepts are very similar, and especially when you think about them like quantum teleportation, you just think, well, if I scale that up, what does that mean? And just like Jake said, our brains, the whole reason why we can have intuition and have creativity, how we can think about what might happen in the future, you could argue that that is a form of entanglement, a form of us looking through those quantum wormholes and perceiving the different realities that might happen based on our actions. It's a form of almost like looking very briefly into the future. The last thing I want to say, and then we can go on to the next. Oh, there's one more comment about that. It's just that you may wonder then about stuff like the Mandela effect. I think that that's something that I like to broach the idea, but again, I leave it to you guys to determine what you think is the reality of it. But if we can manipulate time, then you could have this perception, especially if there's like multiple timelines, that if you were to shift timelines, all of a sudden now the stuff you remember from the past might be a little bit different. Like the Fruit of the Loom always had a cornucopia on it, which I'll fight anybody who says it didn't have a cornucopia on it. Definitely did. But they claim that it didn't out there.
And the Monopoly guy had a monocle.
There you go. Yeah, I remember that too, actually. There's a lot like that. So if that's the case, then you might have stuff like the Mandela effect. But what is more powerful than a super weapon? What is more powerful than the ability to time travel? What is more powerful than a warp nuke? I would argue what's more powerful than that is propaganda. Controlling someone's minds and thoughts and the way they think. And I would argue that's the reason why the government wants to control social media. Because social media, TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, X, all of these platforms, Facebook, this is how people think. We use the Ash conformity experiment. We all want to conform. We're in a world right now, we're in a post-truth world where people don't even care about what's true or what's not. They care about what other people told them to think. And that's the whole reason why we're here doing this right now, is we're doing the opposite of that. We want people to think for themselves. We want to get the information out there that a lot of people are going to go, nope, that can't be real. I wasn't told that can be possible. Well, now you're being told it. Any other thoughts,
Amen
Jake,
to that.
the next one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So if we as humanity, or we as human beings, have the ability to basically travel through these quantum wormholes second by second through through coherence of the quantum wave probability wave into a quantum wave function, then what is the implications then of the collective consciousness of humanity and the effects that our thoughts and emotions have on the vortexes on the planet, and how that's feeding energy and frequency into the grid system, and how that is actually warping space-time in a much bigger sense. In a sense, you could also kind of view Earth like it's a magnificently large and beautiful spacecraft that's moving through space and time, and it, based on the frequency or the consciousness of humanity and the planet, we are then moving to and towards specific realities within this much larger quantum probability wave. So propaganda being disseminated affecting the collective consciousness of humanity is essential in order to govern which reality we branch to in space and time. Now, part of why it is that I advocate so heavily for Tesla towers or 0 point energy is because when you understand how these technologies work, you begin to think in terms like what Tesla said of energy, frequency, and vibration. And the implications for that for collective human consciousness are absolutely astounding. It would literally create a crescendo of consciousness and evolution in consciousness, so much so that the trajectory of the planetary destiny in human civilization is moved toward a higher frequency within this quantum probability wave. And the creation of a mass quantum wave function where we actually branch to another reality and are no longer constricted by the cabal's craft that are creating a scaffolding for our minds and for our collective destiny, moving us toward extinction. So I think that you're right, and I've said it many times, the mind is the battlefield, that this is the where we have to fight the hardest, is to reclaim our minds, to regain sovereignty over our minds and independent thinking. And that's what these patents enable us to do, is they create an evolution in both individual and collective consciousness, which disables and disarms and renders obsolete this system that has been created by less than 1% of the population to enslave us into a matrix and a grid system that is entirely illusory. It's entirely based on misinformation. It is not based on truth. It's based on confirmation bias. It's based on the compartmentalization of millions of people into misinformed realities where they argue with one another and hate one another because they believe different things. So if there is an infinite clean energy source or an infinite free clean wireless energy source, I think everybody, especially the climate activists, would be for that. And they would say, well, that needs to be released to the public, in spite of the fact that it'll have dramatic implications on oil companies or solar panel companies or wind turbine companies. Fuck it. Who cares? If it means freeing human civilization and humanity, if it means cleaning up the planet, then let's do it. That's something that could unify the consciousness within this larger field. And that's where we kind of get into what you were talking about unity energy and unifying these fields, except on a consciousness level.
are so high that the energy densities will allow us to create a localized fusion power device. And we can create superconductivity through this as well. But then the most disruptive one is the idea that we could completely destroy our entire planet with this. This is a super weapon beyond anything we've ever seen before. More powerful
It's like
than
a
nuclear
Death
weapons.
Star.
Exactly.
It's like the Death Star. Right? It's like the Death Star. It's basically creating an interference pattern of such magnitude that it could encapsulate and destroy the whole planet and basically suck it into this massive wormhole.
Yeah, so that's the idea. And I mean, this makes me wonder whether or not we could create a black hole with this type of technology if we were able to achieve energy levels that are high enough and just scale this up. Makes me think of, could we destroy our entire sun, as Bob Greenier in my Second Hard Truths podcast mentioned? But it also makes me wonder, could we create our own Big Bang with this type of technology? So when people talk about like the CERN and the Large Hadron Collider potentially, destroying our planet, I'm not even worried about that thing. That's like a little pea shooter. I'm worried about this type of technology where, we could take, let's just say, some orbs, and we could take that Coulomb's law that we were talking about and have our energy densities increase exponentially. And we start off with a high enough energy source, and now we get to energy densities that are unfathomably high. And now what can that even lead to? So I think it does take a lot of the same concepts that we see from like the CERN Hadron Collider, accelerating photons to the speed of light using superconductivity, and it takes it to an extreme. Now, in terms of the historical references of this, and I think Jake will probably be somewhat familiar with this, is that I've been looking back at how far back this type of technology might go. And this technology, in my mind, can go potentially as far back as 1943 with the Philadelphia experiment and Project Rainbow, where Tesla didn't even want anything to do with it. He left it up to other people like Albert Einstein and other engineers, where they literally built a battle cruiser with the idea that they were going to put these big degaussers on it to create extremely powerful electromagnetic effects, thinking that it was going to shield the object from radar so that no one would be able to see it. But it did something they didn't expect. It created a bubble around the entire craft from space-time itself. And then what we think of as happened is that the object teleported. But if you've been listening today to everything we've been saying, it's not that the object instantly teleported, it's that their time got sped up relative to their time was slowed down relative to the outside, which was moving faster, which gives the perception of instant transmission. But from their perspective, they're just going to look like they were going somewhere. From the outside perspective, it's going to look like they instantly appeared somewhere else. So this technology could actually go as far back as 1943. That was 81 years ago. So to Jake's points before, how long have they been keeping this suppressed? Has this been getting suppressed from us due to national security or the disruptive nature of the technology for that long? That's scary to me. Go ahead, Jake.
Well, dude, the Nazis and the Nazi Bell are something that we know they were working on, and they got the schematics for how to build the thing from the Hindus, from the Indians, when they got a hold of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita and the schematics for these things. So that harkens back to literally antiquity that is thousands upon thousands of years old. And if we get into what you were talking about earlier about those rocks being able to be floating and suspended in midair, then we might just very well have unlocked how it is that like the ancient pyramids were built. So I think that what we are witnessing is not anything that's new, but rather something that is remembered from ancient times. It's like an archaic revival of sorts, where this ancient understanding is now creating a resurgence or a reemergence in our collective mind, because the information is literally in our DNA. It is in the very fabric of space-time itself. Now, I want to note something that you said earlier, because when we're talking about infinite amounts of energy, let us not forget that the universe is made up of infinite amounts of energy, and the singularity this omnipresent source of energy is ever present everywhere within space-time as we know it, right? So essentially what it sounds to me like is taking place here is that we have understood the laws of physics so much so that we have essentially hacked into this divine matrix of infinite energy that has the capacity not just to power our civilization for millions of years, but also has the capacity to destroy our planet, the solar system, and maybe even neighboring star systems, all depending on how much energy we take from this infinite energy source and move to a very, very small and specific location within our physical dimension. Now, when we talk about the deep state and we talk about these dueling factions, what this means is that we've had this technology for a very, very long time, at least since the Nazis, and if not way, way longer before that. I mean, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita talk about an ancient nuclear apocalypse. They talk about it like it's, yeah, this happened, of course. And there's places like Mohenjo-Daro in India and numerous other places across the planet, by the way, that have vitrified stone combined with radioactive isotopes that could only be generated through artificial nuclear explosions. And this is a global phenomenon. It's not just local to India. So this says to me that we're kind of coming back to the same place that we were millennia ago. And now I think because we're coming into the age of Aquarius and because we're stepping into this new awakened state of consciousness, we have all of this data that is literally in our DNA and in our collective psyche. We have all of these lessons that we've learned. And I believe that we're at a juncture in human society and civilization where we can use these technologies without destroying ourselves. We can use these technologies for anything and everything beyond a nefarious agenda or some sort of malevolent purpose. And it's my contention that trusting the cabal that has had this technology and sought to keep it suppressed for quote unquote national security reasons, if we look at any of the things, the myriad of things that are taking place now, these people don't care about national security. These people don't care about keeping people safe. What they care about is maintaining their power and their control. Now, what it makes me wonder is, are we dealing with people that would rather destroy the world than lose control of it? And if so, what would it take at these higher levels of compartmentalized power to ensure that they don't have access to the kinds of technology that would allow them to destroy the world before they lose control of it? But I also want to throw in there this. We as human beings are far, far more powerful than we have been led to believe. We just explained the quantum computation elements of the brain and how we're essentially moving through space and time similar to one of these craft, but we're doing so incrementally and so quote unquote slowly that we don't quite perceive that we are actually bending space-time to a singularity and creating from the quantum probability wave a single quantum wave function that is embodied in physical reality. So that means then that we are constantly tapped into this infinite energy source that could power our civilization for millions of years. Which also means that our consciousness, our spirit as individuals and as a collective is just as, if not more powerful than any sort of technology that could be created by the less than 1%ers. That also means that we at this point actually are our own saviors. We have the capacity to emerge from this matrix of illusion and misinformation and triumph as not just individuals, but as a collective species, and also evolve without the necessity for technology. But what it's going to take is understanding how these technologies work in order to fully understand the capability and the capacity that we have as human beings in our connection to this infinite energy source and the, shall we say, creation of the quantum wave function and the manipulation, shall we say, of space-time itself to these singularity moments that are actually the only thing that makes it possible for us to move our bodies through the room to get a glass of water.
Yeah,
That's where the microtubules came in with the consciousness. If whatever you have that's outside of you, you have to be a part of it in order to move through it. And your non-local consciousness, how you were speaking through that. If we watch how everything moves through everything, we have to be a part of everything that we see at the same. So integrating that reality of the mirror of what's around us into our own selves, giving us the capabilities is a really good idea. I really liked what you guys are saying, by the way. I'm like freaking out over here because I'm so excited. I just want you both to get my props. This is awesome.
I think we both love you too, Jenny. So thanks for being up here with us. Just to add on to what Jake was saying as well, this brings up all the stuff that we've been talking about here brings up some very large questions about the nature of our reality and where we came from, where this technology came from. And I don't have all the answers for you. I wonder a lot about these big questions all the time. This is why I wanted to host this space here with Jake, because I want us to know that Salvatore Pais put these patents out there, not for personal gain whatsoever, but for us to think about these types of questions and know that this technology is actually out there and operational, not just theoretical. And that if we talk about him and we talk about these patents, that can go a very long way to getting this information to a broader mainstream audience where people can begin to ask these questions themselves. And so I wonder stuff like, is this really ancient technology? Is this even current technology? Or are we rediscovering something that we already knew in the past? Like the idea that, maybe they did use some type of anti-gravitational effects, second order effects like this to move giant stones that were required to make the pyramids. It makes me wonder, have we been reset? Our civilization our common history that we can remember only goes back about 10,000 years. Everything before that is just kind of a void. Why do we not know more about our reality, given the fact that we're currently talking right now? I'm talking on a live stream. We're talking through electromagnetic devices here, communicating with one another, with hundreds and hundreds of people together. It makes you wonder, how did we get this far advanced right now? Did we reverse engineer this from ancient civilizations? Did we reverse engineer this from our past selves? Now that we talked about the idea that time is not linear, did we get this information from our future selves? Did they send a message back in time to us that we were then able to reverse engineer and catch up? Did it come
Ashton, in every civilization, there's that story where someone is visited and given a clue that there will be some sort of a cataclysmic event. So that occurs frequently in different civilizations in their lore.
Well, but also let us not forget, though, hold on a second here, like, we are dealing with, and anybody that looks into like ufology and UAPs, we are dealing with almost like a breadcrumb type donation agenda where supposedly the craft or the UAPs that we're talking about, a lot of the time they will like drop something to the ground. And in many cases, they found that what they drop to the ground is like a alloy, a metal alloy that we look at and go, how the hell did this get created? And then we reverse engineer it, and then we begin to build off of that reverse engineering understanding. So that makes me wonder if what Ashton said is true about this notion about, is this us from the future? Now think about this. If these craft have the ability to traverse space-time, if they have the ability to essentially time travel, then is it possible that we are dealing with sort of a convergence of energy moving from the past and moving to the future, and energy moving from the future and moving to the past, that we are dealing with a convergence of these timelines, similar to like what happened with Tenet in the movie Tenet? And are we dealing with these like breadcrumb donations of metal alloys and technologies as a way for the good side, shall we say, the alliance, as David Wilcock likes to call them, the Alliance trying to create a scaffolding for us as humanity to branch to this other version of Earth where we are enlightened and we understand the infinite capacity and capability of not just the human mind and spirit, but also our technological innovation, and branching to a version of human civilization where our technology and our humanity evolve together, so that we can literally evolve technologically, socially, economically, while we're evolving spiritually.
You also sometimes wonder whether or not there were ancient civilizations that were survivals, that, you know, that just did survive any sort of an event and maintained that control over technology on their own.
Yeah, breakaway civilizations that might be out there, and this is why I think the idea of the deep state, and you can call it whatever you want to call it, is that there are people out there that have been holding this power over us for who knows how long out there. And then it makes me wonder about other stuff too. Like, we haven't really broached the idea of aliens, because I think that, it could be us from the future, it could be us from the past, which is pretty damn weird. Maybe there are aliens out there somewhere. I happen to think there's life probably all over the cosmos. And if you have this kind of technology that we've been talking about today, then even though it may be super far away, that's now a surmountable challenge, something that we can overcome. It makes me wonder about stuff like Mars. Some people in my chat brought up Mars. Mars used to have oceans on it. What if we figured this technology out? Maybe we were Martians once upon a time. We figured this technology out. Maybe we destroyed that planet. And this is a very scary thought, is that there's something called the Fermi paradox out there, which is, why do we not see techno-signatures everywhere? There's a couple different answers to it. Maybe we're just not looking correctly. Maybe they are out there. But maybe any civilization that reaches a certain level of technological advancement based on the essentially magic type technology we've been talking about today, maybe they destroy themselves because it's just too powerful. It's a singularity in power itself. Like Jake said, infinite energy out there. So this makes us question stuff like the nature of our reality, as well as the nature of our entire civilization. And so I hope that if people get anything out of this today, it's that we think about those big thoughts, and what, in my opinion, this is what I call true disclosure, is that true disclosure isn't necessarily about the Nordics and the Greys and the reptilians and the mantids and what have you, the various alien races out there. It's not even about having crafts crash and us retrieving them. It's about the technology that would change our world, reshape our world, potentially could be our past and can be our future all at once.
Well, you brought up Mars. Let's talk for a second about Cydonia. And there's a lot of people that say, oh, the face on Mars is just a natural object that had shade on it that made it look like a face. And because of periodelia, we assumed that it was a face. But the thing is that if you look at the area where this quote unquote face on Mars actually is located, there's a complex of pyramids that are also there, that are so mathematically precisely laid out that it creates a Merkaba. And then we also have to get into the fact that Phobos, the moon that is Mars' moon, is also kind of like in a tidal lock, the way that our moon is, where the face of the moon is always facing the planet. And there is an obelisk that is like a mile high that is always pointing down at Mars. And in many cases throughout the orbit, it actually lines up with Cydonia, with this complex of pyramids in the face on Mars. And NASA, now we all have to take what NASA says with a grain of salt, but NASA has said that they have detected radioactive isotopes on Mars that can only be generated through artificial nuclear explosions. Now, let's also not forget the elongated skulls that have been found in digs all throughout the world, in particular in Peru. And the fact that these skulls are actually comprised of 2 plates for the skull as opposed to 3 like human beings. And like, okay, hold on a second. When we look into ancient lore, there's talk about things like ancient giants with elongated skulls. So what exactly are we talking about here when we start talking about the moon and its placement in our in orbit around our planet? We talk about the metal alloys that are on the moon that can only be created through human or intelligent interference and the artificial creation of these alloys. The fact that the moon is hollow, the fact that there's supposed to be not just a Nazi base on the moon that they created in the early 40s, but also there's supposed to be these massive structures on the moon that are indicative of an ancient civilization that used the moon like a starship of sorts, moving and traversing the galaxy the old fashioned way through natural wormholes and through the magnetic field of the orbital rotation patterns of stars and planets. So, and then we cannot forget the planet, I believe it's called Tiamat, according to the Sumerians. It was this massive Earth-sized planet that was in between Mars and Jupiter, and it is the destruction of that planet that created the asteroid belt. And that makes me wonder, did they destroy themselves through the kind of technology that Ashton is talking about? Or supposedly, according to secret space program whistleblowers, it was actually a cosmic war between the beings on that planet and actually beings that were existent and using Saturn as like a weapon, and that the rings around Saturn were kind of like a massive energy weapon, like a Death Star. There's also moons that surround Saturn that have square craters. Like, well, hold on a second. Like, what do you mean square craters? There's no such thing. Like, the nature doesn't do squares and hard lines like that. So, in my opinion, when we start talking about the types of technology that we have come to, at least I believe in this room, believe that are real, where we're talking about creating and traversing wormholes, we're talking about infinite energy, we're talking about superconductivity, the bending of space-time, faster than light travel, etc. If we have come to this conclusion, and if we even believe for a second that ancient people came to this conclusion a long time ago, enough to make nuclear weapons and anti-gravity vehicles, enough to create the pyramids all over the planet and move millions of several ton stones into mathematical precise placement, so much so that we cannot replicate it now, then that, in my opinion, is evidence that there is something else that is guiding civilization. And many of these ancient civilizations believe in this notion of interdimensional or hyperdimensional entities, the gods, the titans, or the ancient gods of Hindu and Vedic tradition, etc. The ancient shamanic traditions talk about star beings and star knowledge and all of this stuff. The sacred sites all over the planet are places where there are vortexes, massive energy vortexes that are natural and a part of the landscape, so much so that places like, yes, Skinwalker Ranch have these areas marked. So, in my opinion, it's a given based on the evidence. The question is, I think, then, what direction is humanity being guided in? And because I believe in a benevolent creator and a benevolent intelligent force, I think we are being guided toward evolution. We are being guided toward spiritual, technological, economic, and physical evolution. So much so that we will become galactic or intergalactic citizens, a part of something that is so much larger and beyond this little matrix that most people's minds cannot fathom.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think these are some pretty big thoughts. The only last thing I want to add on there very quickly is that there's even more than one monolith. There's a monolith on Mars, and there's a one on Phobos, one of Mars's relatively tiny moons out there. So if there was
I said that. Yeah,
oh, you did?
I said
Okay.
that. And it points down at Cydonia. It
Weird,
points
huh?
down at the pyramids on Mars.
Yeah, that's pretty wild to me. So Just because I don't want to go super late, do you want to pull a couple people up? We can do a few questions. I don't want to go too long in the questions, so we can have a few speakers come up, maybe do like 20 minutes of Q&A, or people have thoughts they want to do. For Jake and I, when we bring people up, we love everybody's thoughts out there, but we don't want people to go into a lot of stories. I know that everybody's got their own personal experiences and stories. What we really want to do is we want you to keep it on topic, keep it topical, relevant to the discussion that we're having here, and as brief as you can keep it while getting your point across.
100%. Please keep it to questions. We want to create clarity. So, we don't want grandstanding. We want clarity. Forgive, the bluntness, but that is the case. Let's go to, I see we got Levi. Go ahead, Levi. Oh, he dropped. Bummer. Go ahead and request again. We brought you up there, Levi. I don't know what happened. Go ahead, Source.
Hey, Jake, thanks. This is a wonderful space. Ashton, first time I'm hearing from you. Awesome. Do you know this technology, does it have anything to do with what we've heard of called the Hutchison effect, which is, a couple of interfering strong toroidal electrical fields and bombardment of the interference pocket with high frequency tuned microwaves? And I've seen a few patents with this on it as well. And do you know anything about that? Thank you.
U.S. government can do. The U.S. government has technology that's much, much more advanced and capable than what a guy in his garage has. And this is where you can begin to think of you scale up this technology. And it makes me wonder too about UFOlogy, where a lot of the stuff that we've been hearing out there is like about drones that they're seeing out there. It always gets talked to about drones, but you can imagine if we could have these types of effects, and maybe China and Russia even have them at this point. Some of the stuff that we might be seeing out there is quote unquote drones might actually be things using the Hutchison effect and other anti-gravitational technologies to have unconventional propulsion based on these same exact patents that we've seen out here. It could even be that the only reason why these patents came out is because the United States government knows that China and Russia are either catching up or have caught up. And now they want to get these patents out there because they don't want somebody else to get the patent out there. And now it gets really awkward where the government has to come out and say, oh, yeah, well, we had that 20, 30 years ago. And because then what's the legal implications after that? So you might argue that they had to put it out there because people have figured it out. Great question.
Told everybody.
And let's throw this out there. I think I failed to mention this earlier when we were talking about interdimensional entities or ancient civilizations, and that's the Black Knight satellite. The Black Knight satellite, for those of you guys that haven't looked into it, is a massive object that is floating counter to the Earth's orbit. So it can't be a satellite the way that our satellites go with the Earth's orbit. This thing is going counter to the Earth's orbit. They don't know how old it is, but Tesla speculated that he was getting a transmission that could not have come from any source on the planet, but it was of such mathematical precision in its patterns that it could very well have come from elsewhere, somewhere else in the galaxy or in the solar system. And then we come and we find the Black Knight satellite, and every time we try to get close to this thing, it literally evades us, and we don't know where it's going to be or when or etc. So that's another element to this notion of capabilities of craft out there that are ancient and beyond our realm of understanding that, like you said, if the government has this, I mean, if this guy in his garage has this kind of technology to do this stuff, what does the government have? And if there's civilizations that are literally millions of years ahead of us somewhere in the galaxy or in the universe, then what kind of technologies do they have? Levi, we tried to bring you up, but you got dropped down. Go ahead, dude.
Hey, thank you so much, J.K. Haston. Good to see you again. I just wanted to make a couple of points. First of all, thank you, Ashton. I think the establishment, the U.S. government, fears you the most, and people like yourself and Jake, who are trying to bring this technology out or talk about this technology. And if you really look at the patents, especially the one that talks about the craft using the inertial mass reduction device, and the interview with Ashton, I encourage everyone. That is one of the most important. Ashton, don't laugh. Trust me, that particular interview is one of the most significant interviews out there. And the reason I say that is, and if you look at the interview, and I actually happen to do the timelines for Ashton, and thanks for allowing me to do that for you. And one of the important things that people need to notice there is the reasons he said that why they brought out the patents. It was because the U.S. government could control the military industrial complex from actually charging an arm and a leg to the U.S. government. That's so important, because if they want to mass produce this, right, they would be at the mercy of these companies, these private Lockheed Martins or the Raytheons and so on and so forth. That was the primary reason. And secondly, he mentioned, and I totally agree, that the verbiage used in these patents were designed to detract from people figuring it out, right? It was purposely convoluted. So if you actually look, let me put it this way. I've had the good fortune of sorting out this technology. So when you actually read that in context, right, it will all make sense. So let me put it this way: the craft using the inertial mass gravity, once you figure out technology, you will worship it as a temple of science. If you really understand the technology, you will consider it as a temple of science. Second point is, if you look at that particular patent, with all of the flamboyant physics and the numbers that have been put out there, focus on the claims. That's really important. Focus on the claims, and the claims made is literally 4 claims. Literally, for all of the flamboyance there, it's just 4 claims. That is what creates that particular plasma, which actually is the source of the space time energy, and mass. And that is the glue that actually binds and creates that 5th dimension. And that is the one. And in that particular claim, it also uses the other patents that he's assigned to. That is the piezoelectric room temperature superconductors and the high temperature ones. So that particular patent is like one which I mentioned, the Temple of Science. Is it uses all of these technologies, the high frequency gravitational wave generator, in and that. So basically, what they've done is they've broken down out the first patent into, and the components used to, which is used in that craft using inertial mass reduction, into the different components that's for how to create the high frequency gravitational generator, and then super fuser. It all works in synergy and in sync and in unison in the craft using inertial mass reduction device. So once you figure out the technology, which God has blessed me with that knowledge, and that once you figure it out, it all makes sense. It all says, wow, fuck, this makes sense. But until you understand the technology, it'll be like we can talk about hours. Like we can spend 5 hours and we'll be beating around the bush and we'll get nowhere. all I can say is that and because there's a patent in the US, we can't make this or test this device in the US. However, if there is another country that someone is able to experiment with this, I personally think there is within 5 years we can get a prototype that we can actually negate the negate gravity to begin with. I think we need to really focus on, rather than going from interplanetary, you need a lot of energy, and you need to figure out how to get that immense amount of energy. Let me put it another point, and I'll end with that. I don't want to overstay my welcome here. I think the humans have already figured this out. I'm sure all of you use your noise canceling headphones. This technology works exactly like that. And this is some food for thought, right? Exactly like that. The one thing that is shared by gravity and sound, which is actually he mentions that in his patent, high frequency gravitational wave generator,
Destructive
sound and yeah. Sorry, can you hear me?
destructive interference, Levi.
Yeah. So sound and gravity share one thing in common, is the inverse square law. It is really important. The inverse square law, right? So if sound can be manipulated and cancelled out via noise cancelling headphones, it's the same philosophy that applies. And if you put two and two together, you will figure it out. But I'm not here to spoon feed anybody. This technology is real. Ashton is on the right tracks. The orb videos are absolutely real. And anyone who doesn't believe it, perfectly fine. A time will come where you will appreciate Ashton for his hard work. And and I just thank God for giving me the knowledge and how to figure out this technology. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And I can tell that you looked at those patents and you're familiar with it based on the reference to the Salvatore Pais interview is the one he was talking about. I don't really like to self-promote very much, but that is an extremely important interview, both the one I did with him as well as the one I did with him and Dave Rossi out there. There's a little clue in there, which I'm not going to go too much elaboration on, that is related to spin and to sound, which does begin to unify the idea that sound waves can be used in a similar way where we can create gravitational effects. That has to do with second order effects. So taking your standard sound waves and having, like he said, interference, destructive or constructive interference, and potentially having second order effects come from them. So yeah, I think that also the last thing I want to say is, just like he said, whether or not you think this technology is real, the thing about it is that technology like this is a discovery, just like the discovery of fire. So it doesn't even matter whether or not you believe in it or not. At some point, if it's true, it will become public knowledge and it will be publicly known. I think our objective and goal here is to give you that information before everybody else figures it out. So use this information what you will. Take advantage of it. Profit off of it if you want. I leave that up to you. Everybody's got to eat out there. So thank you very much, Levi. I appreciate those comments.
All right, let's go to and please, once again, let's try to keep it short. Ashton, we're probably looking at like another 10 minutes, maybe 12 at the most. So let's go to, I believe I had AJ Nick up next.
Hey Jake, hey Jenny, hey everybody. This will be really quick. So I was watching the Sean Ryan podcast, specifically the interview with Joe McMoneagle. Excuse me, and with remote viewing tactics, which got me keenly interested. And I've been getting deeper into researching stuff like this. And then I came across something called hemi-sync, or listening to these certain frequencies that can help put you in a state to do like a sort of remote viewing process. I'm wondering if any of the hosts or perhaps the speakers have experience with that, or would like to talk about hemi-sync and remote viewing.
Well, I just want to do a quick comment, then I'll let Jake, because this is more of his thing, probably. Actually, I don't know if it is or not, but so generally with esoteric stuff, even like remote viewing, the science that we've been talking about enables that. In order for that to be possible, you have to come up with this idea that the distance itself is an illusion, that every point is actually connected and we just don't perceive it. And what do you need for that? A fifth dimension. The exact thing that we've been talking about. Faster than light communication, faster than light travel. So to me, if the stuff in the science that we've been showing is real, it opens the door up to remote viewing and other what we would consider like psychic power type stuff. Jake, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you said it pretty well, in all honesty. The only thing I would add is that the CIA has done experiments where they have had people across the world transmit thoughts to one another, and the thoughts they have found travel at the speed of a seventh of a second across the planet. And if everything is interconnected through quantum entanglement and everything is coming from the same omnipresent source, then when you dissolve the illusion of separation and integrate your consciousness into the truth of unity and become one with the omnipresent source of energy, then all things are possible, because at that point you're influencing the schematics of physical reality itself. You're influencing the creation of the quantum wave function. You're influencing the quantum probability wave consciously to manifest very specific results. Now, when we talk about that, I think it's important to note something that actually Ashton posted not too long ago about the DoD threat scenario. And it says, the science exists for an enemy of the United States to manipulate both physical and cognitive environments in order to penetrate U.S. facilities, influence decision makers, and compromise national security. Now, one of the things that is on this long list here of ways that this could be done is actually the alteration or manipulation of biological organisms, as well as anomalies in the space-time construct. So, and as well as things like penetration of solid surfaces. That being said, that is indicative to me that it is entirely possible to say, quote unquote, penetrate one of these secret, dumb facilities, one of these compartmentalized facilities, and also integrate your consciousness into things like the computer data. If everything is interconnected, and if you're at a certain level of understanding where everything is consciousness and wave vibrations, and those wave vibrations transmit information, then you're able to do things like that, which to some people would seem like science fiction. But when you break it down, and I think it actually says in that post at the bottom of that asset that Ashton posted, it said what was considered phenomena is now quantum physics. So, in my opinion, not only is astral projection possible, or bilocation or remote viewing, not only is it possible, you're able to travel the cosmos. That guy, Igor Swan, I think, or Ingo Swan, something like that. He literally remote viewed Jupiter and told them there were rings around Jupiter before anybody knew anything about it. So yes, it's all possible, and it relates to this technology that we're talking about, because what is essentially taking place is they are attempting to create technology that replicates the ability of the human spirit to traverse the cosmos instantaneously. Let's go to.
Sorry, one follow up really quick with that, Jake.
We don't really have the time. Is it going to be short?
Okay, I can DM you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's go next to Allergon. Algeron. Can't hear you. You got to unmute your mic there, bud. Algernon or Algernon. I'm sorry, Algernon.
Algernon.
You can just go to
Algernon.
something else.
For
while we wait.
Algernon.
Algernon. Okay,
There you
well,
go.
we're going to move on to somebody else.
Hey,
Hi
Algernon.
there, Jake. Hi. I think I got a fake touch on my phone, or the universe said that I needed to talk to you guys because I did not pull myself up there.
Okay, well, I mean, if you don't, yeah, I mean, do you have a
I'm
question?
gonna go. I have a lot of questions about this stuff, but I don't feel like I've read up enough on it. So I'm gonna let the mic go and keep listening. Thanks.
All right, no worries. God bless. All right, let's go to Money Penny, and then Energy of the Universe.
Hi guys. Jake, amazing as ever. People are really fascinated in this. So I'm so glad you guys are doing it. Ashton and I did a show 4 days ago. It's had over 2,000 people look at it. 888 people have done a replay on it. People love this topic. They really do. So I was just going to say, thanks for continuing the inspiration. Just one point I wanted to make for other people that are interested and want to know more. The three-body problem that you may have watched on Netflix as a short film has been serialized as the original from the same book in Chinese, but you can watch it with subtitles on Amazon Prime. It goes much more detailed into the scientific stuff, into the quantum physics, the quantum engineering. It goes into the broadcast of signals, the frequency, the vibrations. It talks more, obviously, about the nature of the physicists and the scientists that were looking at, for example, very, very fine, very thin, very strong thread. Now, I didn't even realize the significance of this until I started to look at space ladders or escalators to be built from the Earth, going up towards the satellites and the space headquarters where we could build a space escalator. That's going to be my next post this evening. But stick with it. Go and listen or watch to the Chinese version. You will find much more in it about exactly what's being discussed tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, dear. Okay, energy of the universe.
Yeah, hello. What I was going to say is everything you said tonight is very good. You can hear a lot about what you have mentioned also on Ancient Aliens. I'm sure you're aware of that program. Those guys are pretty spot on. They go over all the different structures around the planet and discuss most likely most likely superior being that either help the human to construct these pyramids and different structures, or they did it themselves. Because as we know, there's pyramids outside of Mexico City. No any sense of because of that, most likely those in Mexico City probably were built by superior beings directly. So that's great.
Toltec.
You said is
Teotihuacan.
fantastic. But what I was going to say is that we need to come together collectively and start maybe call it contribute lab, and we start working on these projects, no matter how small of it is that we start off with, till we get to the point where we finish, because we cannot entities like say and we call them they, and who are
He's rubber banding super bad.
Am I the only one that has him rubber banding
I think he's
really
rubber
bad?
banding really bad.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Energy,
dude.
we can't hear you,
You're rubber
unfortunately,
banding really
man.
badly.
Not a bad idea, though.
Let's go to Source. Maybe he has. I think he had his hand up for a second. We can do a quick follow up on him.
Oh wow, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, Jake knows this is like something I'm very excited about. Spiritual mimicry masquerading as spacefaring technology, and that the Merkaba and the actual light body itself is what we're using these celestial principles. And have you heard about this? The things that we're talking about are maybe celestial. Maybe these are planetary forces themselves, and so it would be difficult to engineer them from logic as such. But a divine sort of intuiting of these forces may have been easier for our predecessors. Is that something that any thoughts at all on that? Thanks.
Jake, you want
to
take that?
When you say intuiting, let me ask him a question. When you say intuiting, are you talking about like with consciousness?
In a way of not having a priori knowledge, like no trial and error whatsoever, just by a hunch, or maybe I don't know. This gives me chills. I can't find the words. That thing, the bones of prophecy. Somehow we intuited these things, like ayahuasca. They said the jungle came alive and told them, the spirits of the jungle told them how to make it. Otherwise, it would be too complicated. They would never have gotten to that point. Nothing would have guided them there but a hunch, And so these celestial principles,
I will just say that our DNA is antenna, our brains are antenna for a data field, and that data field is constantly evolving. In one of my previous spaces with Holo Cypher, we talked about how the entirety of creation is a series of infinitely nested electromagnetic fields inside of an infinite energy source that is constantly evolving, sending and receiving, transmitting data and information, and that it literally mutates and manipulates the fabric of reality in a way to where the input of this new data changes the DNA of human beings and the way seeds are produced inside of plants, etc. So
Wait,
I
I don't know if you would agree with this, but when somebody brought up Hemi-Sync, and there was a person who spoke of thought forms, and you know how consciousness could exist outside the brain. That's something that's a very big topic now. So you know what I'm saying? When you're talking about like infinitely nested bubbles, could we be creating those, you know, as a creator type with our consciousness?
Yes.
well,
Yes.
yes,
I
but
was trying.
that's it's non-local consciousness. Exactly.
But
It's the
however, we're
infinite energy
molding,
source.
right?
But
Okay.
and that's what I'm saying. It's constantly evolving based on the input of this new data. And therefore, so too are we, so that we can then evolve to send and receive this new signal of this new informed, this new data that is a result of this feedback loop of constantly evolving information. So whether or not it's cosmic in the sense of extraterrestrials or interdimensionals, or it's this hyperdimensional consciousness that is doing all of this, it really is negligible. The point is that human beings are a part of the very fabric of reality. And intuiting this information is a form of perception. It doesn't have to come through intellectual stimulation. Einstein himself said that none of his theories or any of his data came to him through logical deduction or rational thought, but rather they were given to him in an instant. He also said that imagination is more important than knowledge. He also said, you know, when our technology surpasses our humanity, we will have a generation of idiots.
Holy
So,
shit! I love this guy. Everyone here, you better follow Jake. This is amazing. I'm floored.
well,
Amazing.
thanks. That was so, thank you. Case in point, it's in our DNA. We literally have 13 billion years worth of information in our DNA. And when you activate all the antenna that are on the DNA that are responsible for sending and receiving light and information, your frequency heightens, your vibration heightens to the point to where that larger data field that Ashton was speaking of earlier, this fifth dimensional field of data and quantum probability, ends up becoming accessible to your hyperdimensional consciousness once it has popped into that other dimension through the frequency of your consciousness penetrating through that dimensional wall, shall we say, which is this illusion of separation. And when you do that, then you have the capacity to do things like astral projection or bilocation at the snap of a finger.
You're referencing the earlier we had spoken on the CIA document. I don't know if you have read that yet, but it goes back to multiple people say that like the universe is the mind or the mind is universe, vice versa. That document is very interesting to look at if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the mystics have said it for
Not
thousands
you,
of
yeah.
years,
Gotcha.
you
Yeah.
know. But let's give it to Ashton to wrap it up.
Yeah, just to quickly respond to that, I think that two aspects is one that I think I like the idea that you can look at this through whatever lens you want. If you want to look at it through a spiritual lens or angels and demons lens or aliens or whatever you want, I think that that's the beauty of it, is that you can interpret it through multiple different ways. And the other thing too that I like is the idea of our soul being some kind of omnipresent thing, and our bodies are just the receivers for receiving the soul that's out there. Andy Weir has a video out there called The Egg that I think about a lot as well, which is the idea that time is an illusion, that we are all the same person living out these lives simultaneously in our own frames of reference, which is, I think, in my mind, a very beautiful thought for what the meaning of life is in general. So just to wrap it up, though, so today, guys, we went over the Salvatore Pais patents. Say Salvatore Pais' name. He is a really nice guy. I get to talk to him pretty frequently, whenever I want, really. He can't really do a lot more interviews right now. I'm not going to go into depth on that. But I believe 100% these patents are real. Technology is real. Technology is out there. It's operable. Be vigilant. Look for when they're using this technology. We can probably catch them at some point in the future, either just as citizens looking up in the sky, looking around, or potentially from future military leaks as well. Talk about the patents that are out there. Talk about them with your family. Talk about them with other people on social media. When these types of high technology discussions come up, bring these patents up. These are a really unique opportunity where they have a lot of credibility to them. They're patents that have been approved. So I think that's what I would say in the end. I just want to thank everybody for being up here, people that are listening. We had a huge audience here tonight. Make sure you guys are following the people on the speaker panel that you liked up here, Jake, myself, Jenny, especially, as well as Moneypenny, who's been working with me a lot on a lot of different things. So I hope you guys appreciated this tonight. I know I had a great time. I hope you guys did too.
As did I. Thank you, Ashton, for lending us your brilliance, my friend. And I'm really glad that we did this space, and the patents are out there and that you're doing what you're doing. And if at any point Salvatore Pais is open to talking to a shamanic practitioner, it would be an honor and a pleasure to chat with him. I understand if he wants to keep his distance, considering the whole January 6th bullshit. But maybe a good word from you might jar his curiosity a little bit. And we wouldn't even have to have him on a space. I would just love to talk to him and thank him for everything he's done. So God bless you all, and namaste. Much love. And stay free.
Okay, chat. I'm going to close this. Okay, chat. So I want to go back over this part. You guys didn't hear this, but thank you guys for being here on this particular space. If you missed the part where it was muted and I talked about the high-frequency gravitational wave generator, I'm going to say that one more time. It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes. So here's the high-frequency gravitational wave patent. If you're just listening on audio, here we go. It may be possible to generate high-power, high-frequency gravitational waves by high-frequency accelerated axial rotation or accelerated high-frequency vibration of an electrically charged, possibly asymmetrical structure. High-power, high-frequency gravitational waves are generated by enabling the Gershenstein effect. That is the gravitational wave production by propagating electromagnetic radiation through strong magnetic fields. Controlled motion of charged matter under rapid acceleration transients may enable macroscopic quantum coherence, namely possible quantum mechanical behavior of macroscopic objects that we can see. If multiple high-power, high-frequency gravitational waves were to be focused on a particular point in the space-time locality, they could induce a space-time curvature singularity, namely a distorted and disrupted patch of the space-time fabric. This is your wormhole mouth, the opening of the wormhole. From a propulsion perspective, a craft enabled with the plurality of high-frequency gravitational wave generators induces curvature singularities in its close proximity, generating a gravitational well in its flight path, thereby rolling down this space-time curvature dip in a manner analogous to surfing. This is how we can potentially use these as a propulsion mechanism. This hybrid craft would be able to move with great ease through air, space, water mediums by being enclosed in a vacuum plasma shield due to the coupled effects of EM field-induced air-water particles repulsion and the local vacuum energy state polarization. This is the bubble, plasma bubble. Does that sound familiar? The controlled motion of charged matter under rapid acceleration transits may lead to room temperature superconductivity. We may be able to say that high-frequency gravitational wave generator device has the capability of inducing a local phase transition from a turbulent regime to a laminar regime, thus allowing for smooth sailing of a hybrid craft through specially conditioned vacuum of space. This is your wormhole bubble flowing through the wormhole. Nuclear fusion may also be able to be engineered using the concept in hand, given the extremely high plasma densities and temperatures, as well as the high energy confinement times, which can be achieved with the generation of ultra-high electromagnetic field intensities. This is the power of the sun in the palm of your hand. At this disruption point, energy may be amplified to such a high degree as to generate a space-time curvature singularity, leading to the total destruction of a planetoid or asteroid. This is doomsday. This is a doomsday weapon. So we have the capabilities here of propulsion. We have the capabilities here where we can make a wormhole. We have the capabilities here where we can create room temperature superconductivity, where we can create fusion power. And with all those things, we may also be able to destroy ourselves using a type of doomsday weapon. So this was a good stream, guys. Just to close it out, I want to thank everybody who was in here today, who was watching and listening. Everybody who's watching on the recording, thank you very much as well. My whole goal has just been able to get this information out there. I don't know what else to do other than to talk about it as much as we can talk about it. I hope you guys appreciated it tonight. And have a good one, guys. Thank you very much, MH370X. You guys are the best. Peace all.